So today's sermon comes from the book Religion, Culture, and Soul Knowledge by Reverend Dr. Albert Gani. And we're going to study a myth, mythology. Mythology is a wonderful tool. They are myths and they have lasted for a reason, because they speak to deep human truths. Deep truths, archetypal truths, profound concepts. And today we're going to talk about the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus was the son, this is a Greek myth. Orpheus, he was the son of a king in Greece, a Thracian king, and his mother was the muse Calliope. He was said to have been the most famous poet and most famous musician who ever lived. And there very well could have been an Orpheus. You know, mythology, reality, they combine. So who knows? 3,000 years ago, there may have really been an Orpheus. But he was said to have been the most famous poet, most famous musician who ever lived. The god of music, Apollo, gave him a lyre, and the muses taught him how to use it. He was so good that trees and rocks would follow him.
Oh, wow.
They would follow him to the sound of his music. And these are all taken from the writings of Pindar, Aeschylus, and Euripides. So they wrote about the myth of Orpheus. Supposedly he traveled to Egypt, where he was initiated in the mysteries. He joined the Argonauts of Jason and the Argonauts seeking the golden fleece, and he consoled them with the music of his lyre, healing them as they struggled through their expeditions to get the golden fleece. When he got back from the journey with Jason and the Argonauts, he married Eurydice. Now, Eurydice was at the bank of a river. Who knows what she was doing at the bank of a river, alone. And she was accosted by Eurystheus. And he tried to rape her. And she was running away, escaping him, but was bit by a snake. A serpent bit her. She died, and she went to the underworld. Orpheus was devastated, absolutely devastated. And so he journeyed to the underworld to get her. And going down there, he charmed everyone with his music. He charmed Charon, the driver of the boat that crosses the river Styx, who could accept you or not accept you, but Orpheus charmed him. Orpheus charmed Cerberus, the three-headed dog that would tear you to pieces. Orpheus and his lyre charmed Cerberus. Orpheus charmed the judges of the dead. And he also charmed Hades, god of the underworld. He charmed everybody. He was very magnetic. He charmed Hades, but Hades said, okay, I'll let Eurydice go on one condition. You cannot look back at her until she reaches the sunlight. Once she's out in the sunlight, you can turn, you can look at her, you can face her, and she's free in the land of the living. So Eurydice follows Orpheus out of the underworlds, following the music that he's playing. She's guided by the sound of his music. Orpheus gets to the land of the living, to the sunlight, and he turns around to see if Eurydice is behind him. She's still back there. But she hadn't reached the sunlight yet. And she was whisked back to the underworld, never to return. She was lost forever. Okay, so that's the myth. There's so many layers here, so we're going to go through them because they're beautiful, they're interesting, and they have meaning for us to apply to our lives. First and foremost, is Orpheus's magnetism. He was magnetic because of his spirituality. His deep spirituality, his connection to the divine through his music. That's what made him attractive. And in the mythology, he was also women loved him. Not only rocks and trees, women loved him too. He was very magnetic. But it wasn't that he was a hunk. It wasn't his body that made him magnetic. It was his deep spirituality. And this is great. This is something to challenge us. To challenge us, challenge our misconceptions about beauty, attractiveness, magnetism. What makes us most attractive is the degree to which we emanate the divine. What is truly attractive in us is our goodness, our beauty, not physical beauty, the beauty we create in the world, and our truth. So that's a great thing to think about and write about. How am I still ensconced in the physical, believing that is what makes me attractive or not? Or age, body, age, outer level. Now, the biggest archetype in this story, though, is the archetype of looking back. And this concept is found all over religion. As you can see, we have it in Hinduism, it's found in Judeo-Christian teachings, Old Testament, New Testament, Buddhism, Greek mythology, looking back. In the Old Testament, in Genesis, the story of Lot, the Jewish leader, married a woman from Sodom and Gomorrah. The biblical era's version of Vegas or New Orleans. When, at God's request, Lot was told to leave and flee. Flee Sodom and Gomorrah. But don't look behind. And Lot's wife, still bound to the perversions of those cities that she was from, looked behind her and turned into a pillar of salt. If you like geography, there are images of Lot's wife, like geologic formations that they call Lot's wife in the desert. Pillars of salt. One of them is her. But she looked behind. She was still attached to her family ties, her history, the distortions of those cities that she was not willing to let go of. Another story from the Old Testament, when the Israelites cross over to the Promised Land, they're admonished not to look back. Don't look back. When they built the golden calf, while Moses was up on Mount Sinai getting the 10 Commandments, they were looking back. They were supposed to have left behind Egypt, left behind all of that, in order to evolve into the new dispensation, the new teachings. But they were looking back. In the New Testament, there is a young man who wants to follow Jesus. And he says, I really want to follow you, but first I need to go tell everyone goodbye at my house. And Jesus said, no one who puts his hand on the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. You can't be with me if you're still looking back. So what does looking back mean for us? How can we bridge this to ourselves and our real life and try to make sense of these concepts? Because obviously, these are important. Here you have it in Greek mythology, at least twice in the Old Testament. Jesus, don't look back. Looking back, one way of looking at it, is being obedient to the distortions of our family. The misconceptions inherited from our family. The misconceptions that we repeat, that we revive, that we believe in, that we adhere to still. You think of the things you hated about your parents, and then you look a little closer at yourself and you say, oh my goodness, I'm exactly like that. This is looking back. That thing I hated so much. Wow, I do that too. And that's how we look back, where we still perpetuate those distortions, those misconceptions. When we do that, it brings on death. It brings on what Freud called the term thanatos, the worship of death. It's going backwards. Freud talks about this, where, we want to return to being like the guy who was a little amoeba crawling out into the sea. It was kind of scary, when they first crawled off or crawled out of the sea onto land, the first creature, whatever, wants to go back into the ocean, the murky swamp. It's dangerous out there on land. Let's go back to where it's comfortable. Well, we do this too. We want to regress into what is comfortable, what we know. This is going backwards. This is thanatos. As opposed to the thrust forward into life. Life is movement. My life is not going backwards. Life is going forwards. So looking back, there's another way that we look back. This is looking back at our golden ages. What is a golden age? A golden age is a glory time in our life. Our glory days. Specific times of our life where we thought we were at our best, maybe our most powerful, most beautiful. The world was our oyster and we knew it. We thought we could get away and do anything we wanted. Usually, youth to young adulthood. It varies, but usually from around age 12 to 30. Some point in there is someone's golden age. Maybe later, maybe earlier. But these are places that we rekindle, that we are stuck. Now, it's easy to identify a golden age in somebody else, as it is with any negativity. It's always easier to see somebody else, not ourselves. But, for example, you probably know people who don't act their age. You're like, this person is still in middle school. Except they're 50. They're still playing video games. They're like, what? That's their golden age. Or they repeat ad nauseum the triumphs of their youth. Like, I knew someone who had been a football star, and my God, I heard the football star story way too many times. The one story of being a football star. But that was the reliving. That was a golden age, that high school football star, homecoming king, whatever. Relived at age 57. Or people who wear clothing that doesn't suit them anymore, but maybe suited them at Woodstock. Or that they're still holding on to a particular hairdo and they don't let it go. You know, the mullets. Like, boy, that might have been great when you were 20, but now, you're like 60 and you're still in this mullet, but this is a golden age. I'm going to keep recreating this place for myself because this is when I felt great. I was powerful. I was young. Maybe I had a lot of partners, whatever, a lot of money. The world was at my feet. The golden age. So you can see people stuck in a particular golden age. It is revisited. It is perpetuated. This is looking back. This is worshiping the past. This is worshiping death. And we do this too. Each of us has our own golden age that we worship in our own unique way. We may not be, sporting a mullet, but we have our own. We have our own golden ages. Looking back is a regressive act, though. You can see it. It's regressing into a place that I idolized, a point in the past that I glorified, the glory of my idolized self. It's a descent into the worship of the body, and it dissolves our progress. And both the god of ancient Greece, Hades, and the god of the Hebrews forbid us to look back. Do not look back. That is the way to death. Do not look back. Divine longing doesn't look back. Divine longing destroys that which wants to look back. Divine longing is always looking forward, always seeking union, always looking forward. Destroying those frozen parts of ourselves. That long, dark tunnel that Orpheus and Eurydice have to go through to get back to the land of the living. I imagine it kind of like in a cave, and they're deep in the earth, my visual, making their way up to the land of the living. But this is our path through the lower self, through the death, through the darkness of our wrong thinking, of our misconceptions, trying to get to the light, trying to get to the land of the living, trying to be vibrantly alive everywhere. And so we have to traverse this long, dark tunnel, this passage, with patience and steadfastness. Not halting too near the shore, as it said in that quote. You have crossed the great ocean. Why do you halt so near the shore? When Orpheus turns around too soon, that's a representation of our impatience. Impatience. Like, look, I conduct my life in ethics and truth, right? I'm trying. I'm cleaning up. I'm cleaning up my messes. I'm cleaning up my lies. I'm cleaning up the dirt of my life. I'm doing good work. And I want results now. I want results now. And I'm not getting them. I'm turning around too soon. I'm pulling up the little plant that I planted, checking to see how deep the roots are. Are you growing yet? I'm impatient to reap the benefits. I'm impatient to reap the benefits of being aligned with truth, of living in accordance with spiritual law, of doing what's right. But this is a really important point. I need to align myself in truth without thinking about results. If I think about results, I will be corrupted because I'm not doing it for its own sake. I'm obeying spiritual law with a hook, with an expectation of a reward. Now that's not obedience. That's not surrendering to truth. That's not surrendering to God's law. That's obedience, false obedience, obedience with a hook. And that sucks us back to Hades. Now, what is a valid reason to look back? There is one. It's to challenge and destroy and to dissolve our negativities, the dark forces within ourselves and without ourselves. We revisit the past to clean up our memory of it. We revisit the past and look back to heal our outrages, to find the roots of our problems. It's not indulging in the past and worshiping the past. It's a cleansing of the past. It's penetrating our past with light. Penetrating our past with light, with truth. Dissolving the wrong thinking. Dissolving those misconceptions that created suffering in our past. Created evil in our past. And continues to perpetuate it today. So how do you apply this to your life? Because this is really fascinating ideas, but how can I apply this? What have I left behind? That's a place to start. Who have I left behind? Parents, friends, ways of thinking, habits, even places where I lived, ways of life, relationships. You're no longer that person. No longer that person. But how do I still look back? Do I ever have opportunities to revisit that, where a door opens and I could go back? An opportunity to rekindle a relationship comes back. Do I walk through that door? Do I want to walk through that door? Is walking through that door looking back? Or hobbies, all kinds of things. I'm no longer that person. How do I look back? If I looked back and went back there, how would it deaden me? How would it keep me from life? How would that keep me from the land of the living? So as you can see, this myth has so many beautiful layers to bring to our life. It's not just an interesting story, sad story. It has real depth, and that's why it has survived for thousands upon thousands of years. As it says in the Satapatha Brahmana 9:2-3:27, those journeying into heaven do not look back. So let's take a moment and go inside. And we pray to practice the right penetration of our darkness, the right looking back. And to let go and release our past. Thus fusing Orpheus, Lot, Moses, the Christ, in one beautiful teaching. And so let's take a minute and we will pass our offering plate.